When we say the Haitian Revolution, let's assume nobody knows anything about it. And I know some Haitians listening and some people who are Haitian Revolutions folk. So I'm not an expert on the Haitian Revolution, but like everything else, Africana studies is the study of Africa when and wherever you find it. And it's not just the study of the African subject, however complex and sometimes many times contradictory that is. It is the process through which we study. So if you're saying you're doing Africana studies, that means you got to have a method. The method is to always begin to ask questions that help us reveal who these Africans are to each other, even as we are always cognizant of who they are to other people, other forces, other constructs. All right. This is the book that we talked about last week. This book, this is the second edition of the book. This book was written in 1938, 2 years after the Toussaint Louverture play. Was written by the same guy, the Black Jacobins, Toussaint Louverture and the San Domingo Revolution. I didn't pull the 1938 edition. I pulled the 1963 edition very purposefully because C.L.R. James made some light edits. He changed some things around in the second edition. But what C.L.R. James is doing, Cyril Lionel Robert James, by the way, from the Caribbean, from Trinidad, very important figure. You know, if you think about C.L.R. James, there are a number of good places to start. But James was a scholar. James was a writer. James was a thinker. James was a very important figure. He wrote on everything from cricket, which was like the national sport there in the British Caribbean in particular, and the British colonies, India, other place, Pakistan, for example. But he wrote about politics. He wrote about, he wrote as he organized. He wrote as he studied and thought. So if I'm looking for Anna Grimshaw's book, I thought I had a copy of it around here, but I might not have pulled it. Oh yeah, here it is. This one's a little old, but it's a good place to start. C.L.R. James Reader, Anna Grimshaw, and there are a number of other books. If you want to read about the Black Jacobins and how it actually kind of had influence, you can get this more recent book. This is Rachel Douglas's book, Making the Black Jacobins, C.L.R. James and the Drama of History. But let's get to the man himself.
What is a Jacobin?
A Jacobin is almost a person who is engaged in revolutionary struggle to create a different world, a different society, one based on radical equality. You know, in the French Revolution, they talk about liberty, equality, fraternity, 1789. I mean, so the Black Jacobins were those who embraced a similar idea, and Toussaint was at the center of their practice. So this is what the French say they're doing. Okay, then that's what we're going to do too. And that actually, by the time you get to 1791, 2 years after the so-called French Revolution really gets going in earnest, you're in a moment when there's this quote unquote revolutionary fervor. I'll never forget, there was an exhibition at the New York Historical Society I went up to see because at the same time they had the original draft of the 13th Amendment on display. And I remember standing there thinking about the fact that this piece of paper right here was supposed to grant people who were my ancestors some sense of legal humanity, also known as citizenship, which is a problem. But upstairs they had this, man, if I had the catalog is around here somewhere. Parenthetically, when you go to exhibitions, if you got a few dollars over from the admissions fee, if you're going, always check out the museum gift shop and always ask if there is an exhibition catalog, because the exhibition catalog will have not only pictures of much of the stuff that's in the exhibition, it's going to have many times long form essays about what you're looking at. It's important to get the exhibition catalog. And I remember that exhibition catalog because it had a Black man's picture on the front. And, you know, and they get obsessed with this notion of these individual Blacks who stick out like sore thumbs in these white societies to kind of reinforce the idea that there were radical Black. In fact, we all know Alexandre Dumas, the Count of Monte Cristo. This is his grandfather, General Alex Dumas, who was with Napoleon, the Black Count. You know what I'm saying? So they always got these Negroes. It's interesting because he lived at the same time as the Haitian Revolution. Very important. And of course, he ends up getting killed. They off this brother right here. Born to a Black slave mother, a fugitive white French nobleman in Saint-Dominique. He's born in Haiti. Alex Dumas was sold into bondage, made his way to Paris, where he was schooled as a sword-fighting member of the French aristocracy. When the revolution broke out, he joined the army at the lowest rank, yet quickly rose through a series of legendary feats to command more than 50,000 men. No matter how high he soared, Dumas continued to live by his blade and his boldness in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet because of his unwavering principles, he ultimately became a threat to Napoleon himself. If you've never heard of General Alex Dumas, I'm going to leave it right there. All right? Y'all have to check out the Black Count. But on the cover of the exhibition catalog at this freedom exhibit at the New York Historical Society, when I went up there to see it, they're talking about how Black people participated in this quote unquote age of revolutions. So when we think of these revolutions in the 1770s and 80s, we think of the American Revolution, we think of the French Revolution. But this exhibition made clear, along with putting on display a copy, and I never forget, I emailed my friend, former student, now colleague at Howard, Natalie Pierre, who's one of those 20% of Africans who came from other places. She's from Brooklyn, but her mom and them came from Haiti. So she's Haitian. In fact, Natalie, and we'll talk about this in a minute, in 2010, when the earthquake happened, she was down there writing her dissertation. Her dissertation is on the idea of Haitian statecraft. It's a very important piece of work, in fact, where she talks about this. She's talking about the idea of how did the Haitians try to create a country in the wake of this revolution. But at any rate, that exhibition talks about these revolutions, but they elevate the Haitian. I say elevate because it's a social structure conversation. It ain't us talking to each other. So in other words, to invite the Haitian revolution in is to say, see, we understand this is global and it's not just black, white people. It's black, the Black Jacobins. Let's go to CLR James. The thing I love about it, and we all love language for different reasons. Different language for different reasons, right? The language of comic books is different than the language of the Bible. Not always. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But the thing I love about CLR James is that in the language that he uses, CLR James is a poet, man. CLR James writes. I mean, he's like Du Bois in that sense. If you're not used to reading writing that is written to a certain high standard, not high, I'm gonna say high standard in context, a certain use of language, you can very easily find yourself either, some of my students might say they're bored. You're not bored, because boredom literally means you've mastered something so well that it no longer retains your interest. You didn't understand that, so you can't be bored. Bored means you understood it so well that you now, okay, let me move on to the next thing. No, you're not bored, you stop trying, because the language has literally been machined into these sound bites. Pause. Let me just get to James. You know what I'm saying? And I know listen, not only as an English major, not only as a journalist, not only as a best-selling author, Karen, you've literally had to create and remachine and wordsmith and edit and think through people's testimonies, people's narratives with the reader in mind. And so probably better than all of the thousands of people who are joining us as they do every Saturday, as well or better as any of us, how thinking through how the reader will consume this language has probably had to shift the way you've written.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine for a writer like you what that must feel like over the arc of enough years to see the patterns change, so that now, if it ain't in 280 characters, now how am I writing? CLR James, thank God, was not consumed with that in the first or second edition. This is what he says. CLR James says in 1789, the French West Indian colony of San Domingo, supplied 2/3 of the overseas trade of France, and was the greatest individual market for the European slave trade. It was an integral part of the economic life of the age, the greatest colony in the world, the pride of France, and the envy of every other imperialist nation. The whole structure rested on the labor of 500,000 slaves. In August 1791, after 2 years of the French Revolution and its repercussions in San Domingo, the slaves revolted. The struggle lasted for 12 years. The slaves defeated in turn the local whites and the soldiers of the French monarchy, a Spanish invasion, a British expedition of some 60,000 men, and a French expedition of similar size under Bonaparte's brother-in-law. The defeat of Bonaparte's expedition in 1803 resulted in the establishment of the Negro state of Haiti, which has lasted to this day. The revolt is the only successful slave revolt in history, and the odds it had to overcome its evidence of the magnitude of the interests that were involved. The transformation of slaves, trembling in hundreds before a single white man, into a people able to organize themselves and defeat the most powerful European nations of that day, is one of the great epics of revolutionary struggle and achievement. Why and how this happened is the theme of this book. Haiti's still paying. George Washington, it's impressive. Napoleon, it's impressive. Toussaint, Dessalines, Christophe. Wait, it's really not y'all? It's these black women and men with machetes? What the heck? Wait, and y'all won? Wait, y'all beat Napoleon? Yeah. His brother-in-law came back for a rematch. We whipped that ass. Oh, wow. Okay. So, but I thought you wanted to be with them. Oh, no, it's complicated. Wait, so let me get this straight. Here's where we go through the real quick thumbnail history. And I'm not even going to go through the dates because y'all can read it for yourself.
Before you do.
Yes.
Haiti has to fail for this white power structure to succeed. So it has to fail.
It has to fail today.
Yes.
It has to fail today. That's right. It has to fail for the same reason Black Wall Street had to fail. It has to fail. No, actually for a bigger reason than Black Wall Street. It has to fail for the same reason that you Negroes can't ever be allowed to go off and police yourselves. Even when you say you are loyal subjects of the crown, which is what Toussaint said. In fact, I'm not even going to go too far into this, but I got to read this sentence. This is the prologue. Because remember, before there was Africans in Haiti, before there were Spanish, before there were English, before there were these buccaneers or anybody else in Haiti, before the Caribbean was ungovernable, the human beings who were there, the Tainos, the Arawaks, in fact, Taino is where we get the word Haiti from. So if you Haitian, you know, you don't say Haiti, you say Haiti, the high place. Because that was what, when Dessalines is asking, you know, what did they call this place before? Because they ain't gonna call it Saint Dominique no more. Hell no. We ain't calling it that no more. We done beat their ass. So what should we call it? Well, what did they call it before? Everybody, all these people over here showed up and drug us over here. Well, one name was the high place, Haiti. Taino. Okay. Haiti. That's the name. So understand. Oh no, it has to fail. Because, well, anyway, look, this is what he said. Look at this. I love it. I ain't gonna read but one sentence. This is the first sentence of the prologue. C.L.R. James writes, Christopher Columbus landed first in the New World at the island of San Salvador, and after praising God, inquired urgently for gold. see, that's one of them books. I ain't got no shade on anybody. When you got a writer like C.L.R. James, he's going to pull you through every moment in that conflict. And let's just reduce that conflict very quickly to a couple of things. We'll go through a quick chronology. Columbus claimed Saint Dominique in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. There's a whole nother backstory with them, except, you know, in 1492, right? And then, of course, almost immediately, he started capturing the natives who helped him. There was a storm. They rescued all their stuff, and nothing got misplaced or stolen. These people are, man, they certainly naive. Look at their clothes, and they don't speak our language, so therefore they just these savages. I mean, these Indians, and I'm looking for Indian. You know, snatch a few of them, put them on the boat. We're gonna take them back. Then you got a priest, Bartholomew de la Casa, you know, read his book, The Devastation of the Indies, why he's like, you know, this is immoral. What the hell? But I know we got to make this money, so why don't you just go get the black people? So La Casa is caught up in the contradictions of Europe. He's caught up in the contradictions of Spain. He's saying, Columbus, what you doing? These people is crazy. Disease is wiping them the hell out. They have no protection against disease. We're going to see disease come back in about 5 minutes in the Haitian Revolution for another reason, because then they do start getting the Africans. They wipe out the population of the Caribbean, just like everywhere else in the Western Hemisphere, through disease. It ain't through killing everybody, although they are brutal. They killing, they attacking, sicking dogs. I don't know what it is about Europeans and sicking dogs on people. It's a long tradition. Every time I tell my students, for example, you be watching them documentaries, and you see a German Shepherd in there in Selma or Birmingham, you know, and I said, imagine them dogs talking to each other. It's just my grandfather, Bitter Man in Birmingham. That's the police dog today. Yeah, I'm a long line of dogs. My great grandmother, Bitter Black Woman in Selma. I mean, in other words, why you always sticking dogs? That's why the Congolese, for example, well, not Congolese, Congo by Congo, others of Mbundu, the people in Zaire, what was called Zaire then, we're going to talk about that in a minute too, in terms of how some of these dictators tried to use African culture as a weapon to keep the people in place, call themselves being heroes of African culture, but they were really dictators. That's what you see Mobutu do in Congo after Patrice Lumumba is killed. With his help was really the CIA and England and Belgium and the United States in the middle of it during the Kennedy administration. After they off Patrice Lumumba and they used Joseph Mobutu and a cat like Moshe Tshombe in Katanga to do it. Then when Joseph Mobutu comes in as the leader of Congo, he says, we're going to go back to Africa. We're going to do the He makes a leopard skin hat. He keeps a stick. He changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko. And he says, this is going to be authenticity. So we're going to change the name to Zaire. But that's one reason why the black people in Zaire were cheering so hard for Muhammad Ali when he beat George Foreman's ass in 1974. There's a brand new book called Rumble in the Jungle that continues that conversation about what happened, because George Foreman got off the damn plane with a dog on a leash, and they looking at him like that's the same damn dog the Belgians got. Okay, Ali Boubaye, Ali kill him. Why? Because if you know Congo cosmology, you know that the Kalunga line, which separates the living from the dead, those of us on top of the ground from the ancestors, is considered a line that is water, and that line is policed by dogs. Dogs have always had this kind of crossroads figure, all the way back to the ancient Egyptians. Ampu. You know, when you look at the Greek Cerberus, that three-headed dog, the Greeks didn't even make that up. They just stuck two more heads on a dog. You got to go back to the original canines of the ancient Egyptians, because remember, in the Greeks, Cerberus is the one that helps the ferryman take you over into the land of the dead on the river. Why? Water is very important for Africans, and dogs be around water, which is why you don't see a lot of dogs as pets in Africa, although dogs always be around. Dogs run with dogs. So if you go in the bush or you go in the village, you see the dogs be with other dogs and they walk around. You have them around, but you don't really be having them in your house like that. So at any rate, so they were sticking dogs on people, Columbus and them. It was disease, it was dogs, it was guns, it was working them to death. Lacasa says, go get the Africans. They go get the Africans. And when they bring the Africans, they also bring other things they hadn't meant to bring. There's a long line of scholarship on this. There's a book called The Columbian Exchange, which was from years ago, but it's not been written since. What comes over on those boats that wasn't intended to come? Seeds, plants. Sometimes the Africans brought them, secreted them away in orifices or kept them somewhere and then they reproduced over here. Sometimes they went in their hair, just happened to be there, you know, and it ends up catching on over here in the Western Hemisphere. Also mosquitoes. Them African mosquitoes? Where do we get to this in a minute? Because after Susan is killed, when you see Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the mosquitoes become part of the Haitian army. But at any rate, it's crazy. I mean, these cats, man. Oh my God. Anyway,